Okay, so welcome everybody to the GEOPI webinar. I'm Marko Monteiro. I'm a professor at the Science and Technology Policy Department here at the University of Campinas in Brazil. It's my pleasure to mediate the webinar. I want to thank GEOPI for the invitation. Today, this is the fifth 2022 webinar from the GEOPI laboratory. So GEOPI is for those of you who aren't familiar, it's the Laboratory of Studies on the Organization of Research and Innovation. The group was set up in 1995, and it's dedicated to carry out studies and consulting on strategic planning, evaluation, and future studies. This webinar is also co-hosted by the INCISPO program, and I encourage people to look up the INCISPO website. It's an international research project involving many wonderful researchers. Won't have time to talk about it here, so let's just go directly to our guests today. So today we're thrilled to receive Emanuela Reale and Natália Koga. Emanuela Reale is director of the Research Institute on Sustainable Economic Growth, IRCRES CNR. Her research area is the study of the public sector research institutions and policies, with particular reference to university policy, governance, funding mechanisms, methods and tools for university and research assessment, science and technology indicators. She has worked in numerous national and international projects as PI or as coordinator. Since 2019, she's a member of the Consortium Management Committee of the European IRCRES infrastructure for research on science, technology, and innovation. Emanuela is also a member of the board of the European Forum for Studies on Research and Innovation Policies, EU SPRI, member of the board of the Consortium on Higher Education Research, and of the board of the ENID, European Network of Indicator Designers. She has published widely, and we thank her for being here. Natália Koga is a researcher at the Institute of Applied Economic Research, IPEA, here in Brazil, and also professor at the National School of Public Administration, ENAP. She has a PhD in political science in Westminster. She's also master's in public administration and government by Fundação de Getúlio Vargas, here also in Brazil. She has a bachelor's, I guess, in law by University of São Paulo, and she has been visiting research at the Institute of Development Studies, IDS UK, and the LBJ School of Public Affairs at the University of Texas. She's a career member. She's a specialist in public policy and government and governance in the Ministry of Economy since 2004. She currently works as a researcher at IPEA, and she's also teaching at ENAP. Her research covers topics such as public policy, evidence-based public policy implementation, bureaucracy, state capacity, state civil society relationships, and democracy. So our webinar today is widely themed research and public policies, exploring interactions. I'll invite Emanuele to go first, and then Natália. Each one has about 30 minutes, and then we'll open up for questions. Emanuele, please.
Okay, thank you very much for your nice presentation, and I try to share the screen now. Okay, I think you can see the slide now in the screen. So
yes.
Okay, perfect. My presentation will take stock from the title of this webinar to analyze something about academic research, the interactions between academic research and government funding policies, which are one of the core issues in research and innovation policies. Oh, sorry. It's not clear how I can. Sorry, there is some problem with the slides. They don't go. Sorry, I try again. I'm very sorry, but maybe you can see now again the screen.
Hi, Emanuela, can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear.
Oh, okay.
That's fine. Okay, sorry for this problem, but the slides show you the content of my presentation. I would like to say very few words about the interaction between research and public policies, as it is, since it is one main issue and main topic in research policy. I give you in the presentation an example of funding instruments and funding agencies through programs, so how the interaction occurs when programs, research programs are designed. I will also say some words about the problem of the directionality of the policies toward the societal grand challenges and sustainable development goals, which is the main topic in policy design, and which allow us and ask for a new type of exchange and interactions. And I say also something about the emerging concept of responsiveness and responsibility, which are very, very important, especially after the period of the pandemic COVID-19. And then I will say some words for conclusion. So, as I said, interaction between research and public policies has always been a problematic issue. And we have clearly some periods, yeah?
Emanuela, just sorry for interrupting. We're not seeing the slides. It's all blank. Are you sharing them?
Yeah.
Yeah, for some reason, they're not showing up. Can you try again? I'm so sorry for this. Can you stop sharing
and control remotely?
Maybe you send the slides to Ana Maria.
Yes, I think it's better now.
Ana, can you show the slides for us? That might be better.
Yes, you can send us in the chat and we can share.
Can I put them in the chat? Can I put them in the...
Oh yeah, you can share documents in the chat. Bear with us, people. So sorry for the technical problems.
Okay.
I
don't know why. Really, it's the first time it happens to me. I always so used to, so it's very strange.
Yeah, it's no problem.
Where is it? Found it.
Have you seen them in the chat?
Yes. I will just enable here and start to share. 1 minute, please.
Okay.
Okay,
So
perfect.
can you see it? I will
Yeah.
just
You
put
can
on
see-
presentation mode.
Yeah.
And is it correct?
No, it's
No. Okay, I will switch.
it should change.
Yes, exactly.
Now?
Okay, perfect. Thank you. Emanuela, so sorry. Please go ahead.
Can I use them? No, you have to move to the next slide. Okay. Okay, it is always, as I said, in the interaction between research and public policy was clearly a problematic issue. And there is, we can see that there is a change along the time between what was in place during the 80s, especially the metaphor of this tacit negotiated contract between the state and the research community. Which is based on a clear division of tasks between the two parties. Government provide money through research, but to policies, but policies basically are just elements to send money to the community, and the scientific community provides knowledge, retaining the power to decide how to allocate more money and how to decide what type of contents should be in the research agenda. Now, from mid-90s, with this kind of conceptualization enter into a crisis because of several changes due to the new conception of research of universities as elements and actors in the economic realm, and research sometimes was well affected by the neoliberal paradigms, and then it's sometimes also seen as a commodity. So the new conceptualization is that society is not only represented by governments, and science comprise different actors contributing to the production of a social robust knowledge. It's mean that the former contract was not in place now, and the idea is that negotiation between the state and the community is the rule, but it's not only a renegotiation which involve the scholars in the different fields, but also all people that can be invested and interested by the results and the outcome of the research. That means that stakeholders enter the game. The next slide. Okay, so if we think about the interaction, we can see that the landscape now is completely different from 80s, and it's extremely characterized by different levels of interaction that we can have. This scheme show you as example the stream of funding that we can have, and at national and subnational and European level. And you can see how many organizations and government level interact, and how many also research actors interact. The slide clearly indicates clearly done looking at the European Union landscape. We have several governments in European Union which contribute to European Union, which contribute to funding agencies, and which contribute to European and international agencies. And then there are other streams which come from the European international agencies and go to higher education and public research organization by the way of funding agencies. Then there are other streams of funding which goes directly from funding agencies to the research performers, and other streams that go from the European Union to supranational performers, or by the government to supranational performers. This scheme is just to characterize how many type of relationship can be in place in the landscape of national policies, especially national research policies, and how many interaction between public policies now and research can be at stake. So it is an example, but it can be useful to highlight the complexity, because this is something which characterizes a new relationship between research and public policies, that is the complexity of this relationship. Next slide, please. So, if we want to look at funding, we can see the first question we can have is what research funding programs are. And indeed, research funding programs are instruments of policies. Looking if we follow, for instance, the approach to policy instruments, which was developed especially by Reale in France, we can say, or we can understand that the sentence that is in this slide, so that the programs are creature of legislative politics and of bureaucratic politics. So programs are policy instruments which are aimed and affecting strategies, involve different actions, and have a different intention and way of interpreting the programs. So actors involved in the shape of programs, which I repeat are policy instruments, so they reveal what the content of policies are. The actors are political actors, implementation actors, beneficiaries, stakeholders. And all these actors interpret differently what the programs are devoted to be. Also, the programs have reveals what they can do by the set of some core practice, the selection practice, the funding rule, and the accountability that contribute to shape the interpretation of the meaning of the programs and to shape the action of the performers. So we can read the interaction between public policies and, this is the message, public policy and research, looking at policy instruments, but not only at the design of the policy instruments, but also at the actors that policy instruments involve, and how different actors interpret what is written in the programs, in the policy instruments. So there is the problem of the distance between the design of the policy and implementation of the policies, and here is the space in which negotiation between research and public policy is mainly done. Next slide, please. In this case, in this respect, one very important element is to consider the role of the research funding organization. Research funding organization are organization at a mediate level between the state, the government, the very high policy intention, and the research community. So the group, research groups, the research organization, the performers. So the idea is that these RFOs are settled in, if we look at the European landscape, they are more or less present in all the European countries, or many European countries. They have to manage the quest from the state about the social relevance of research. And so it's important because they design and implement the place in which these negotiations are operationalized, and because they have to shape the instruments, adapt to put forward the social relevance and in the objective of the instruments and in the selection criteria, in order to try to convince the scientific community for basic and applied research to cope with this social relevance of the research they have to do. So there is a lot of tension in the relationship between RFOs and the project in managing project funding and the government, as well as the same type of problems and tension can arise also from in the relationship with the research community. But what is interesting in this kind of actors, and this is the way for which the reason for which I put them in evidence, is that they really have a policy space in which they try to maintain their autonomous room of maneuver with respect to both the parties. And so they are really key elements and key organization in this kind of negotiation. Next slide, please. Okay, this is one example of how we can shape and describe the programs. So programs can also be seen and studied as a set of opportunities. So in this slide, we have 4 kinds of opportunities. 2 kinds of opportunities intended and provided are more related to the design and first implementation of the programs, while the other 2 perceived opportunities and mobilized opportunities are more on the performance side. And the type of representation of the negotiation that this slide, this scheme show you, is that we can imagine the process and the feedback process of which deals with the creation and implementation of a research program as a set of intended opportunities. So what the ultimate goals and objectives that the policymakers want to realize. And so the impact that they want to realize with these programs are the set out right goals and objectives. Then we can have provided opportunities, those opportunities that are the signals sent through the call, the selection practice, and accountability. And these are not exactly the same. So we don't have to think that intended opportunities, what the policymakers want to do, is what they provide as opportunities to the scientific community. But because the passage from the description of the objectives and then what is written, for instance, in the call, in the selection practice and accountability, may have a great distance. And so there could be some incoherence between the 2, and also the impact expected could be very different. Then there is the side of the performance in which you have what are the opportunities that the beneficiary, the potential beneficiary, perceives from the programs. And this is very important because it is a way for selection, for the selectivity of the performance. Because you have performers that on the basis of what they perceive from the programs decide to apply or not to apply. And if the perception is not the correct one, you have a bad selection of the potential beneficiaries. Then after the perception of the opportunities, you have the opportunities that the community mobilize. So what the actual beneficiaries realize is not completely in line with what are the opportunities that they perceive, and what are the opportunities that have been provided by the policymakers. So the distance between these different moments in the policy cycle, let me see, of the programs, can give us several information about where are negotiations with impeded or would increase the possibility to reach a certain type of results from a policy. And it's also the place in which, again, I said, the negotiation between the different actors are in place. Next slide, please. This is something which is in this slide, is something which we know very well. This project funding allocation, I already said, is used for research oriented toward producing useful results and effects on society. But indeed, there is a general concern which is documented by several pieces of literature about the low prominence of the orientation toward social relevant objectives or research activities, and there is so a tension between the relevance of scientific work for society and the autonomy of research, which are at the core of several policy studies. Next slides. And this is something which is ongoing. We are developing within IRCRES dataset on funding instruments in European countries, in which we have a description, a set of descriptor and indicator on each funding programs, and also linkages to the project that these funding programs have funded. Here you find one interesting slide which only deals with the research council in few countries, just to show you the percentage of curiosity-driven and topic-oriented project funding instruments on the total project funding instruments in 2017, but the data have been updated now, in some European Research Council. This is interesting because Research Council in European countries, and especially in these European countries, have a very prominent role as funding agencies, and you can see that the curiosity-driven type of research is really prevalent with respect to innovation or policy-oriented type of instruments, with two relevant exceptions, which are in Norway and in Switzerland, where the Research Council makes drift toward and designing instruments which are very much related to the realization of policy goals. And in this case, we find several new elements in the governance of the agencies, which first and foremost are related to the entrance of stakeholders in the board of these organizations. Next slide, please. This is the same data, but here in this case, the percentage of funding instruments are related only to this criteria used for the selection, for the assessment of the proposal. And you can see that the prevalence is to have only scientific quality criteria and only academics in the panel. Again, with some exception. This is quite indicative of what are the orientation, in the implementation of the programs, what are the orientation of the funding instruments for the funding organization for the implementation of the funding instruments. This is just to let you understand what kind of data we try to collect and to manage in order to enter with objective data, so with the capability to have also quantitative type of analysis applied to the evidence on how policies are shaped and how interaction between research and public policy occur. Next slide, please. Okay. It's interesting to say that coping with these grand challenges, it has been clearly outlined by Stefan Kuhlmann and Harry Riep, is a challenge in its own right. And it's also important to understand that having an orientation toward social grand challenges and social development goal is something which include and put in evidence the problem of how to inform policymakers about the results of research. So one key item in when we speak about this kind of research or interaction, it's also to understand how the relationship with the policymakers can be correctly done. So in here, one problem is the problem of distorted or partial information between researchers and policymakers. And so one key question is which affects this kind of interaction is how policymakers incorporate the results of research in decision making. And this, next slide, please, is something which is really at the core of several studies, and there are several pieces of literature. I put here just some ideas about the problem of a different type of distortion, which are linked to cognitive selectivity or normative selectivity. So can be some problem about cognitive selectivity. So individual cognitive distortion, which are in good faith, or systemic cognitive distortion, which are linked to communication gap, and communication gaps are really, really relevant for the interaction between research and public policies. Communication gaps, dealing with communication gaps is also important to eliminate or to overcome ideological drift can affect policy making. And then there is normative selectivity, so the data could be selected on the basis of vision, pre-existing vision that exclude any element contrary to the assumed ideological position. This is quite interesting. We have several pieces of literature and are extremely relevant in higher education policies, for instance. All the reforms of higher education systems, which can deal with several outcomes and results from social science research in the field of higher education, were completely ignored because of normative selectivity of policymakers. And that we have also literature about this concept of socially constructed ignorance. So the low capability to understand complexity and completeness of the reality. And the risk, this is very important in the last period in the last years, the risk linked to the excessive use of statistical and mathematical models or indicators, which are seen as objective and rigorous analysis, but lose the important elements of the reality. So the simplification which comes from the use of this tool, political tool, can be something which drive to distortion in the decision making, and so in the relationship between policies and research. Next slide, please. Okay. Last point, I try to go very fast because I don't want to lose the time. So just one element that we can have is about this new concept of responsiveness and responsibility. Responsiveness is more related to what I have already said about the capability of science to cope with grand challenges and social relevant topics, while responsibility is something which is related to the responsive research and innovation, responsible research and innovation, which is a top-down initiative from the European Commission, but very, very important now at the level of the policy making, and several universities and public actors are affected by the needs to cope with this kind of initiative. It has been analyzed by several scholars. The most important is the paper in 2013 on research policies. And it's important because the implementation of this responsibility shall impact a research organization governance mechanism for decision making, evaluation, and recruitment. And also because this responsibility concept is strongly linked with the university third mission. So there is a clear linkage between the capability of the universities to deal with responsible research and innovation and the capability to have a good activities within the third mission. New slides, please. So here, just to say that the responsibility focusing on university as a public performance organization, the most important maybe are different type of responsibility affect universities in strategies and planning, in research project at the laboratory level. So we have the central level and the very performance level. And the specificities is the capability of university to act as strategic actors, but at the same time, the problems that responsibility can introduce in the relationship with scholars, because responsibility in some case could be seen as a new way for constrain the freedom and the autonomy of researchers in order to, for instance, in order to shape their research agenda differently from what they want to do. Next slide. Okay, we can move on about this because these are just the 4 dimensions of responsible research and innovation in the Still GEOPI paper. We can go to the next slide in order to use less time. And so in this slide, these matrices show you the different level in which responsibility can affect universities, and how in the different dimension of responsibilities in the different levels of universities. So we have a problem of responsibility in anticipation, future possibilities and emerging fields and technologies. The problem of inclusion, so the open up of decision-making process to external voices. Responsibility also includes reflexivity, so the questioning about responsibility, how to deal with responsibility at university level, and also with responsiveness, so questioning about transparency of what we are doing toward stakeholders and citizens at large. And the same type of dimension can be found at the research project level, so at the level of the researchers. So integrating the results of anticipation in the research activity, including stakeholders, building connection between internal value of the communities and external beliefs of people outside the communities, and also changing the direction of activities under development when the control and possible effects are insufficient. So you can see that here the interaction between research and public policy became more and more complex. If you go beyond what is the rhetoric, the political rhetoric, and which political rhetoric is not only at the policymaker side, it's also at the decision-making side. For instance, there is political rhetoric even in the declaration of the strategies of a university sometimes. So the rhetoric in the policy making and in decision making is much more complex if we keep seriously this kind of challenge that we have about responsibility. Next slide, please. So I have to skip these slides. So next one, because we don't have time. Okay, and this is something which is quite important in my view when we speak about relationship, because one key element of the relationship is the setting up of learning process between so the relationship can be also a way in which we start learning processes between the people involved. And indicators in this respect can play a very, very important role about responsibility. So we can use the matrix as a canvas, the matrix that we have shown as a canvas or reference to represent the characteristic of the action within the universities and exercise the reflexivity as a collective action. So learning through indicators means that we shall start to think about some activity indicators, not only input-output relationship, because this is not something which is really useful for learning process, but activity indicators as language for evaluation of responsibility to be used as elements, as tool for public debated based on hard facts through interaction between different actors in order to improve this science and society relationship. This is something which is in place in some projects, but needs to be more systematized and also find ways, good practice for being implemented at universities. And then the last slide, I think there are some conclusions. So, no, I have to skip this one and go to the last one. So the conclusion, I think we are in the middle of very important changes and transformation in the 2000s, which are also has been accelerated by the problem of the pandemic COVID-19, which completely open new possibility, but also show some problems and limitations in our actions. So we have to, there are clearly changing views on research and innovation process, which affect also the interaction between academics and politics. They deal mainly on how research and innovation are generated, how they affect society and institutions, and not only research in itself. And also the problem of the impact agenda, which is shaping our research agenda very, very much. And all these changing views are claiming for improving the democracy in decision-making. In this, I repeat, the role of formative evaluation policy learning is very, very important. Claim for developing the institution and scientist awareness before society, the opening of spaces of public dialogue, and questioning about choices of academic research and what we decide, what we really want to realize. So I hope this kind of example and stimuli can give you some ideas about, or can help about reflecting on this important issue of relationship between academics and research and public policy. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Reale, and we'll go directly to our next speaker, Dr. Natália Koga. Please, Dr. Koga.
Thank you very much, Marko. Thank you very much, everyone, for the invitation and for the exciting presentation that Emanuela provided us. I will bring a more, I would say, micro level analysis of our question provocation. That's the exploring interactions between, in our view, the policy makers and the academia. I'm, as Marko said, I'm from the Institute of Applied Economic Research, and there we have been producing some empirical work on the discussion of the use of knowledge and use of evidence in policymaking in Brazil. So we have some different approach for this question, but I would like just to highlight this left, I believe that's in the right side of the screen, publication, that is this book that was recently published by IPEA with, I believe, 27 chapters from different authors who are dedicated to understand in different policy areas how knowledge it was mobilized in the policy making process. So this is, I will bring in this presentation some data from this research project. We had some discussions related to this specific topic of the interface between academia and the public managers and the policymakers. But I think it's important to say that we started this whole project provoked by this recently movement, especially in Brazil, is recent for us in Brazil. That's the movement of evidence-based policymaking. I believe most of us, of you, is aware of this movement that started in the late 1990s in the UK with this big slogan that what matters for policymaking is what works. It's more popular in the Anglo-Saxon countries, and we would like to understand how this movement was absorbed or not in the context of the policymakers in the federal government for the start. And for us, we started with the literature of policy analysis. So for us, the EBP was a movement that brings with them some traditional ideas of the public policy studies, such as the scientific neutrality, the instrumental rationality, the emphasis on problem solving, and also engage with new elements that come from different fields as well as the medicine-based, the evidence-based medicine, as the hierarchy of evidence, and having in that the control experiments as the gold standard in the top of this hierarchy. In the policy studies, this view, more positivist view, was criticized throughout the last decades, and because of that, we decided to explore the discussion, starting with the real context of the policymakers. So we decided to try to understand in their daily routine what actually was the type of information, of the type of knowledge that they regularly used. And sorry for not being translated here in the table, but this is a survey that we carry out in the end of 2019 with federal bureaucrats that were working in the ministries. And we asked them what sorts of information that they use for their policy work. And we can see here that the type of information that they use more frequently were actually the kind of knowledge that was produced within the public administration itself, such as their own experiences, such as technical notes that the bureaucrats produce, such as administrative records, and even recommendations from the legal agencies or from the control agencies. And that scientific knowledge, like papers, chapters, and books, they are not that used in the same frequency as these other sources of internal knowledge. And in the bottom of this, would say the hierarchy of preference of these bureaucrats are some other external type of knowledge, particularly the one that was provided by society, such as recommendations for participatory instances or the opinions of the beneficiaries themselves of the policy. Something that I believe that's very related to what Emanuela brought us about the necessity of thinking about democracy and knowledge production. So to synthesize that, we would say that, well, different sources of information are in this environment. Scientific sources are not the most used. Internal and experience-based sources are the most used. And we found a low level of use of societal source of knowledge. I'll ask Marko just to tell me when I have 10 minutes left, just for me to organize the final part of the presentation. Is that okay?
Yeah, okay. No, we're a little bit late, but that's okay. Please keep going.
Okay, I'll try to speed up a little bit. But, well, this is another technique that we use, a factorial analysis, to try to understand the different source of knowledge, to show that forming types was found, as we mentioned, the governmental internal type of knowledge, experiential knowledge, external academic knowledge, and external gray type of knowledge that come from different actors outside the bureaucrat agencies themselves. Well, it's important to say as well that this scenario is not particular from Brazil, that the direct use of scientific knowledge is not seen as the most frequent in other countries as well by the bureaucracy of other countries, even in countries such as Australia, where the evidence-based policymaking movement is more present, or even in Czech Republic that has administrative structure more similar to ours. There we see a lot of similarities in terms of the levels of frequency of use of the different sources of information, taking into consideration that scientific knowledge is not the most used, and again, the internal source of knowledge are the most relevant for the Czech Republic bureaucrats. That at this stage of the project led us to think about the two communities theory that was raised by Kaplan in 1979. Probably you are very aware of that. That see that academia and public management, or academic and practitioners, have different principles of action, different incentives to act. On the one side, academia operates in the principles of rationality, provisionality, accumulation of knowledge. On the other hand, the public manager or the decision maker works in a context of that legitimacy, certainty, agility in responses are the most important principles. So that could give us a very pessimist scenario. But when we started to digging in our data, and not only from the survey analysis, but also coming from the different case studies that was produced in the book that I've mentioned, and also from qualitative kind of data that we produced in the project, we started to think about what happens in the middle and to explore these interactions. And three main aspects we believe are relevant to point out for our discussion. The first one, we saw data, we produced information that shows that policy context matters. Our investigation also showed that it's important to look at the role of internal sources and also the role of bureaucrats, and that probably part of that bureaucracy act as knowledge brokers. So I'll go to each of these topics that I've mentioned. First of all, policy context matters. Yes, we saw variation if we look at the survey data in different contexts of policy. In this first graph here, we can see that different policy areas have different preferences in terms of that four type of knowledge that we showed to you first. For instance, in the environment field, the societal kind of knowledge was more present than the rest of the sample. And in the case of the infrastructure field, the bureaucrat seems to have a higher preference for the academic knowledge. If we look for the type of work that the bureaucrats perform, we can also see that some variation, that the bureaucrats that are more engaged with analytical kind of work, they use more academic knowledge, and also the ones that perform this type of relational kind of work, that are the ones who are in the middle of we call the middle level bureaucrats, or who are in roles that they have to negotiate to build consensus with other stakeholders of the policy, we see that they use more academic kind of knowledge. And in terms of internal sources or in-house knowledge, we can see that there are, if we cannot say that the bureaucracy produce new knowledge, that's something that data were showing us that they are producing. They operate in a dynamic of knowledge brokerage. That's this process of filtering, translating, and even validating knowledge that are external to the state into the state. These are some examples. We can say that for the ones who are engaged with the science technology studies, and also what Emanuela brought to us about the instrumentality of the policy making, that the administrative records play important role in producing stabilization of concepts for the policy making. We can see as well that some guidelines on how to evaluate public policies that came from the civil, this was, I believe, was the Ministry of Planning and Economy. Some recommendations also that are coming from these kind of commissions, advice commissions, or the kind of contracts that are provided by public agencies to contribute to the implementation of some policies. All of them are materialized, are in this kind of instruments, in these inscriptions that are internal inscriptions that have this role not only of choosing what kind of knowledge should get into the state, but also playing this role of translating it and validating it, and sometimes transforming it in another knowledge broker.
Natália, 10 minutes.
Yes. 10 minutes, okay. So, well, probably these last slides here, that's some data on who would be these knowledge brokers, bureaucrats. We saw, we look at our survey, and we extract the group, the sample that use scientific knowledge with a higher frequency, and try to draw their profile. And we can see that they have high individual analytical capacity. What I mean by that, they have a high level of education. 80% of them use it, who are using scientific knowledge are PhD or postdoctorate. They perform analytical or relational work. They are in specific positions, especially in the mid-level managers. We saw this phenomena. And what's important, they more frequently interact with the academia in their daily based routine. They are in some policy areas, in areas with greater accumulation of evaluation and scientific evidence, such as science and technology, but also as expected, as justice and public security, health, and environment. We saw as well through other investigations that this kind of analytical capacity can be high in the individual level, but we lack a lot of organizational incentives and capacities in order to build a system of advice, a strong system of advice, and the governance of evidence, something also related, in my view, to Emanuela's presentation, and it would be very interesting to hear more from you on how to continue investigations on that in the Brazilian case, and on advices for us as well on how to produce this kind of spaces. But just to finish it, I would just bring some of the initiatives that we are working on in terms of building the bridge between the two environments, the academic and the policymaking. we saw that we have some data that's showing that academia can facilitate the use of scientific production for the policymakers, and also policymakers, besides of developing capacities, they could also facilitate the life of academia, bringing in their planning, bringing in their guidelines, what source of knowledge are relevant for them to implement the public policies. And also something that we are really interested in hearing from you is this new frontier, that is the frontier of intermediation or co-production of knowledge. This is a question that we leave on how to integrate states, scientific and societal source of knowledge. It will be very interesting for us for this discussion in our point of view. These are some data that shows that credibility and prestigious of the sources are relevant for the policymakers to decide to use the type of evidence, and applicability, and also operational recommendations are also very relevant for them. These are some data on capacities that I believe I won't have time for show. And this is some of the initiatives that we are looking at in the Brazilian case on how to build these bridges, including some that IPEA are working on. I think I will not have time for telling more about this, but maybe in the discussion, we have the opportunity of mentioning some of them. But well, I've tried to keep on time. Thank you very much. And looking forward for the comments and suggestions.
Thank you so much, Natália. Just for people that just got here, we're a little bit late. And I need to say that I have something at 2 p.m. So I'm going to do this. We have some questions. I'm going to read the questions and leave them to you, and then I'll give you both a chance to answer. So because we don't have time to do answer each one separately, but I'm very excited about the talks. These are very interesting, very relevant topics. So in discussing, just a few comments before I read the questions, I was really fascinated by Emanuela's discussion and overview, I guess, of how the question of impact and responsibility has been developing in the European context. I've been involved with RRI research for a while, so that's also, to me, very personally, very interesting. I think it has become a more global concern, how to achieve better impacts, more socially robust, whatever that means, impacts in research. And I'm very curious about how this is really impacting the lower echelons of research, universities, like you said, because my contact with responsibility, it was more of a top-down, like you said, a top-down policy from the commission. And it wasn't, this is 2019 when I left the project. It wasn't really digested by all the countries in the same way. So it would be very interesting to hear you talk about more how that actually filtered into the universities where the research is actually being done. And I know there's a ton of things being written about this. So I'm very curious about that. But it's an agenda towards more impact, more openness, more democracy, more democratic science. I think it's a very fascinating movement to see this whole discussion of responsibility. And for Natália, I think also very fascinating the data that you bring. It's also in contrast with Europe. Your talk was more about the use of knowledge for policy, and you're more focused on the bureaucracy of government. And I sense, I don't know if you agree with me, that our bureaucracy, our policy is still very much inward looking and not too much concerned about opening up and having more direct relationship with even scientists. I mean, like you said, we tend to integrate science within the bureaucracy. A lot of people have PhDs. A lot of these managers have PhDs, and they have individual capacities. And we have a lot of public institutions that are producing knowledge for the bureaucracy. I mean, IPEA is a good example. Your own institution is producing a lot of knowledge, a lot of high quality research. So how does that, in Brazil, how does that translate? The idea of more responsibility, more impact. I don't think this is also from my own perspective, of course. I agree with you. It's more of an individual initiative when you see people reaching out and to become more responsible, more anticipatory, more reflexive. It's not something that has become internalized in institutions. And it's also very interesting that we have a highly qualified bureaucracy, but the politicians aren't really looking at science when we think that they should, so it's also an issue to think about. We are a very robust bureaucracy, very technical bureaucracy, but also a lot of times in Brazil, we ignore the science, we ignore evidence for making policy. So that's kind of an interesting dilemma. Okay, so let's get to the questions. I'm going to read all of them. We have quite a few now, so we can get through before 2 p.m. Let me go back here. Okay, so first question is from Sheila Fogassa. She's from Embrapa, which is also a public research company. Very important. And she's asking, in the monitoring process of public policies, what precautions are necessary to avoid discontinuing the gains during the transition between governments? Another question from Professor Sergio Salles. How do you measure the extent to which these initiatives are really entering into the research ecosystems? To which measure STI funding agencies are adopting some of the guidelines here presented? I guess these are questions for both of you, so we can... So there's more. Questions from Beatriz Couto to Emanuela. One, in the scheme of the different levels, I think that there is a link missing between EU and government and other direction, because these relations are not only one way, but also two ways. Curiosity-driven research is not a good, she's asking. There is a discussion, especially in the energy transition area, in which would be not good to dictate a technological stream to pursue, for example, hydrogen, electric vehicles. How do these cases relate to this lack of autonomy from the research side to pursue certain topics? This is still Beatriz. In the European level, there are more and more projects that try to involve actors outside academia. Is this a response from the 2000s of communication and to advance in the diffusion of scientific results? And Beatriz also asking Dr. Koga, in the research in the civil servants that use scientific results to base their policies, are they only on the federal level? Because it is known that the higher level of education among the federal level civil servants in Brazil, when compared to state and municipal level government, I guess federal is more educated or more specialized. That's what she's meaning. Hence, how to avoid support the other level civil servants. Evandro Kogo, a researcher here at Campinas also. What are the potential existing tensions between using scientific evidence or engaging academics in policymaking? And last question. Sorry, guys, there's a lot of questions. Questions from Sergio Salles from Campinas. How does the Agreement on Responsible Research Assessment recently issued by the European Commission will really impact the way researchers organize, funded, and evaluated? Okay, so we have about a bit less than 20 minutes. So can I give you each 10 minutes to comment? Sorry for this. So Emanuela, you should go first.
must confess that I did not capture all the questions because there are many and also complex questions sometimes. I'm going so to answer, and you look at the questions, please integrate and ask me when I miss elements.
Yeah, no problem.
What should we avoid? What should in the interaction with the policymakers? Well, I think that we should avoid completely saying that what you want to do is very, very relevant, because this is something which they know. So what we found in several investigation about impact, which also deals with the problems in the interaction with policymakers, is that policymakers generally expect that when you interact with them, you want, let's say, money, but not money in the sense that they have to give you money, but they want to give you some funding in case, but also relevance, prestige, because you want to have the recognition of your capability to generate good results. So the importance in the relationship with policymakers is to take time to introduce them to the problem, to try to empower them with the elements that they don't know. And so and also it's important to document the importance of your results, especially in social science research, by testify the relevance from using the advice of other stakeholders that find your results relevant. So if stakeholders come to the policymaker and said, oh, this is very interesting results, I have used them, I think it's there is a potential there. This is something which easier very much the policymakers' interaction. But what we should avoid, in my experience, and also in some elements from the literature, is a relationship in which you try to exert your authority power, let's say, because of your position of a scholar. I know things, you have to do as I said. No, this is not something which has completely to be avoided, because the idea is try a good way to dialogue with them, try to understand how they can understand yourself. So it's something which put all the actors involved on the same level, no hierarchy, no capability of being of know more, because we just have different type of knowledge, and we have to understand how my knowledge, let's say the scientific one, can be incorporated in the decision that has to be taken. That's the first question. Research agencies, there is a question on research agencies. I don't know exactly what they ask for. They are relevant actors, but I don't remember exactly this question, what was for. I put this note.
Let me try to come back here. I think it's Sergio Salles, how to measure the extent to which the initiatives are really entering to the research ecosystems, to which measure these funding agencies are adopting some of the guidelines.
Okay, well, there are several possibilities to, let's say, measure or try to find indicators about how they act and how they cope with the guidelines and so on. Of course, it's difficult to have, they are not collected on a routinary way. They are subject to a specific survey or specific, generally, or specific type of investigation related to assessment exercise. What we try to do within RESIS is for funding instruments, so for policy instruments and for projects funded by these instruments, to find out some descriptors which can be used
as indicators of the extent to which there is a coherence between the implementation of the performance with respect to what the program wants to do. This is an ongoing effort. I don't know if the question is correctly addressed. Has been. Then there was a long question about curiosity-driven research, and frankly speaking, I don't want to enter in the debate about if curiosity-driven research is a good level or not. I could have used basic research and was not adequate as well. Curiosity-driven does not mean that the research is not oriented toward the goal. It's just means that the design of the project and also the direction of the project is completely driven by the autonomy of the researchers. Point. Because otherwise we enter a very long discussion. There is a lot of literature on this, and I think it's more a nominal problem than a real important one, apart in the case in which you want to make a specific paper or investigation on definition, which is very relevant, but this is not our case. Indeed, the orientation of the policy, research policy in this period has become more and more important. And I must say that one emerging problem in research policy is the normative drift that is clearly visible in our public policies. Normative drift means that policymakers try to enter in a way much more to limit the autonomous capability of the researchers to make their research, to make their agenda, and try to address them in more precise way along the social relevance of the outcome they expect to produce. This is very clear. So it is also clear that this normative drift has a cost in terms of our autonomy. And one example I can tell you is about the recent efforts of the European Community in the National Plan for Resilience and Recovery, which after the COVID, there are important items which are related to funding research activities. And all these programs are very, very oriented and precisely describe what things that can be done and things that cannot, that are outside this kind of funding. So there is a clear reduction of the space of autonomy on the one hand. If we look at the other hand, another point of view could be that we can learn as researchers to use our work for more responsible type of actions, where responsible type of action means asking ourselves what is our knowledge for? I mean, the bulk of activities, research activities, which are not theoretically oriented, meaning theoretically oriented, based on developed new theories, is very large. Second point, our research efforts most of the time are produce incremental knowledge. That's something that we have to reflect as a community. So I think that if policymakers, that means the taxpayer, because a policymaker is a representative in democratic states, represent taxpayer. So those that pay our salaries. If they ask for more transparency, if they ask more responsibility, if they ask about more capability to produce wealth and social relevant results. I don't think that we have to answer we need our autonomy, because this is, of course, it's true. But we have to understand how these kind of questions challenge ourselves. This is my message to if I correctly understood the question. Then there was a question about the potential existing tensions between scholars and between who?
Actually, Manuel, I wanted to ask you to synthesize so I can have some time for Natália.
No, for me, it's there are two questions that I leave out, but
okay,
I think Natália can do.
That's fine. Thank you so much. I'm sorry because I have to really
No,
get
it's a lot of questions.
It's too many. Yeah, a lot of very complex questions. Thank you, Emanuela. Natália.
Thank you, Marko. And I was thinking to wrap up with just one large comment. I believe, yes, you are right that the bureaucracy is it has an inward concern. We are using data for the federal government. So this survey was a survey applied with the bureaucracy in the ministries. It's totally different if you look at the local level reality. But I believe that to finish replying Sheila's provocation on how to make some sort of resistance against discontinuities that governments bring, this change of the political scenario, I think that there are two ways that we could enforce. One of that is to use better these knowledge brokers, these bureaucrats that have this double identity, that are academics and also practitioners. I think they are a way of getting into the state apparatus. And the other one is that our reality is very different from the European one, in the sense that we have a very low infrastructure of policy advice in the state. So we have to enforce, to develop this kind of governance in an institutional way. So that's the only way to, in fact, resist of using this analytical capacity in order to resist illiberal governments or undemocratic governments. I think that's my final thought for all this provocation. Sorry for not being able to reply all of them, but a lot of insights are inside my head, and I hope we can have other rounds to keep this conversation on.
That's great. Thank you, Natália, and thank you again, Emanuela. Thank you, GEOPI, for this. I think I'm gonna end the transmission now. Thanking everybody who was watching our stream, and hope you come for the next one. Thank you very much.
Thank you.